She typed her last word, then disappeared without a sound. Welcome to Sayers and Secrets. I am your host, Frankie Rains. Drop a comment and share where you're catching this mystery from tonight. Your presence keeps the shadows at bay. Let's dive in. There's an order to live inside the brownstone on West 35th Street, and it runs about as loose as Nero Wolfe's belt after a 3-pound cassoulet, which is to say, it doesn't. You don't show up uninvited. You don't speak unless addressed, and you don't, under any circumstances, interrupt Wolfe's orchid time. Unless you're packing a subpoena or a Montenegrin war medal, you knock at your own peril. So when the doorbell rang at 9:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, a full 18 minutes before Fritz was due to bring Wolfe his first beer, I knew we were already off to a bad start. I answered the door because, well, it's in the job description. That and chasing leads, dodging bullets and keeping Wolfe from throttling clients with his vocabulary. What greeted me on the stoop was a tall, brittle man in a camel hair coat with the kind of posture that comes from decades of filing things alphabetically and being ignored by everyone important. His eyes were sharp, though, grey and twitchy, like a squirrel that knew too many secrets. "Mr. Goodwin?" he asked. "I'm Mortimer Cray." He said it like he expected the name to knock me sideways. It didn't. "I'll alert the press. Step inside." He did, clutching his briefcase, like it might snap at him if he eased his grip. I led him into the front room and gestured to a chair that Wolfe tolerated for guests. The leather let out a long sigh as Cray settled into it, shoulders still hunched, as though even furniture made him nervous. "Mr. Wolfe is indisposed," I said. "You've got 6 minutes to explain yourself before I invent a meeting we forgot to have." "I need your help," he said. "Someone's gone missing." "People do that," I said, "usually with cab fare and regrets." "Who is it this time?" Cray opened the briefcase and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the coffee table like it was an ace in a card trick. "This is Miss Emmeline Voss, my firm's top dictation typist. She disappeared Sunday night. No note, no contact, just gone." I looked at the photo. Late 20s, dark hair pulled into a neat twist, chin lifted like she didn't take. Sass from the men whose letters she typed. The eyes, though, there was a story in them. A long one, maybe a sad one. Did she have a habit of vanishing? Never. That's why I came. She was meticulous. She took shorthand like a machine, never late, never flustered. Sounds like a dream employee. Why not call the cops? Cray shifted, tugged at the knot of his tie. "We can't. The documents she was typing were sensitive." "Government?" He hesitated. "Worse, legal." Now that got my interest. I took the bait like a good trout. "What kind of legal?" Cray lowered his voice. "A private testament, dictated under duress. Emmeline was the only one who heard it." Behind me I heard the faint creak of leather from the office. Wolfe hadn't emerged, but he was listening. He always listened when words like testament, missing, or duress floated through the air like smoke. I leaned back. "So let me guess. Someone wants that testament to stay secret, and they figured removing the typist would do the trick." Cray swallowed. "Possibly, or maybe she took it herself." I glanced toward the hallway. "Hang tight." I walked back to the office and leaned in. "Client's name is Mortimer Cray," I said. "Legal secretary's vanished. She was typing a sensitive testament, He wants discretion. Wolfe didn't move. He was seated at his desk, hands resting on the arms of his chair like a monarch judging a jester's dance. He didn't look up from the book he wasn't reading anymore. "What inducement?" he asked. "Implied scandal, confidentiality, and the sort of nervous energy that'll ruin our rug if we leave him out there too long." Wolfe closed the book with a sigh. "Bring him." I went back to the front room. "His Majesty will see you." Cray followed me like he was walking into a confessional. Wolfe barely acknowledged him until he sat in the red chair opposite the desk. Then he gave him the once-over. "You are employed at Cray and Leeds Attorneys," Wolfe said, eyes half closed. "You are not the principal, but the managing administrator. You chew peppermint pastilles, avoid starch collars, and fear embarrassment more than criminal prosecution. Now, what has happened to your typist?" I sat back and let the show begin. Cray blinked. "She vanished 2 days ago. She was typing a last-minute codicil to a will spoken by Gregory Leeds himself, my partner. It had consequences." "What sort?" Wolfe asked. Cray's throat clicked. "It disinherited his children and transferred control of the firm to his second wife. She's 27. And Leeds died Monday morning. Stroke. Unexpected. Natural causes." Wolfe opened his eyes. "Indeed." Cray looked as if he regretted coming already. Wolfe studied him, then flicked his hand in a regal wave. "Mr. Goodwin will require the names of all parties privy to this testament, also the wife, the children, and Miss Voss's address. That will be all." "For now." Cray stood, fumbling with his briefcase. "You'll take the case?" Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "I already have, but I may yet regret it." He left in a hurry as if the walls had teeth. Wolfe waited until the front door closed. "I dislike testaments," he muttered. "They reveal too much about people still alive." "And you believe the girl's disappearance isn't voluntary?" I asked. "She vanished after hearing the intentions of a dying man," Wolfe said. "Intentions that profited some and enraged others. One does not abscond for curiosity." He shifted his bulk and rang for Fritz. "Bring beer. I must think." I made a note in my pocketbook. "Find Emmeline Voss before someone makes her permanent history." When I came back from walking Cray to the door, Wolfe hadn't moved. He was still at his desk, still glaring at the space where thought lived, and still radiating the displeasure of a man whose morning routine had been hijacked by drama before his first bottle of beer. "Fritz is bringing your beer," I said, like a nurse to a grumpy invalid, and I took the liberty of telling him to hold off on breakfast. I figured eggs en cocotte wouldn't sit right with legal skullduggery and a missing typist on your conscience. He barely twitched, but I knew him. That meant agreement. I headed for my desk, flipped open the notepad and began jotting down the essentials while they were still fresh. One missing girl, one freshly dead senior partner, one testament with the potential to torch a law firm's reputation, and at least 3 people with something to lose: Mrs. Leeds, the disinherited children, and possibly Mortimer Cray himself, who looked like a man who'd faint if you served him black coffee after noon. The brownstone had a certain rhythm, and anything that threw it off, unscheduled guests, unusual cases, or Fritz running out of Belgian endive, meant a ripple that carried through every room. And Mortimer Cray's visit was no ripple. It was the first crack of a storm. Wolfe knew it. I knew it. Even the orchids probably felt it in the air. 10 minutes later, Fritz appeared with the beer. Wolfe took it like a condemned man takes communion. "I shall require the cooperation of Saul Panzer," he said, voice low and precise. "Before you engage him, establish the essential details. Visit Miss Voss's address. Discern whether she left voluntarily or under coercion. And Mr. Cray's list, did he provide it?" "He slipped it into my hand on his way out," I said, pulling the folded sheet from my pocket. 3 names: Caroline Leeds, widow; Barry and Sylvia Leeds, the kids, ages 31 and 27, respectively, all reportedly furious. Add to that Emmeline Voss's landlady, who apparently hasn't seen her since Sunday. "Begin there," Wolfe said. "Obtain detail. In this case, fact may be more eloquent than witness." That was Wolfe's way of saying I had the fun job. While he got to sit in his throne and think thoughts, I'd be trekking across Manhattan, digging through the emotional debris of the dearly departed Gregory Leeds. By 11:30, I was headed downtown, a light drizzle misting the sidewalks and enough cloud cover overhead to make you feel like the city had collectively forgotten its morning coffee. Miss Emmeline Voss's boarding house stood on a narrow street in the East 60s, tucked between a deli and a dog groomer. The building had 4 floors, all brick, with curtains that hadn't been updated since Coolidge. I buzzed for the landlady. She answered in the clipped, suspicious tone that only rent collectors and professional snoops like me deserve. "I'm not interested in whatever you're selling," she said. "Not selling," I replied. "Looking for Miss Emmeline Voss." A pause, then reluctantly, "Top floor, 3rd door on the left. Come up." I climbed the creaky stairs, wondering if every floorboard was part of an alarm system. The landlady met me in the hall, arms crossed over a pink cardigan. She was round in shape, square in judgment, and wearing the same expression Wolfe gives to overcooked squab. "I'm Mrs. Bell," she said. "You from the law firm?" "Close. Private investigator. Miss Voss has gone missing." Mrs. Bell snorted. "Tell me something I don't know. Rent's due the 1st of the month and she didn't come home Sunday night. Her room's locked. I got a key, but I didn't touch anything. Mind letting me take a look?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If it helps bring her back, fine. She's a good girl, quiet, smart, never any trouble. But something's not right. She didn't even pick up her overnight bag, and the lights were off. Felt wrong." She unlocked the door and stepped aside. I walked in. The room was tidy, which told me plenty. No dishes in the sink, no clothes scattered on the floor. Bed made. Typewriter on the desk, covered. Stack of shorthand notebooks neatly aligned. What stood out was the absence of any suitcase or purse. If Emmeline had skipped town, she'd done it without her toothbrush. I checked the drawers, the wastebasket, even the windowsill, nothing out of place. But the desk drawer had something odd. An envelope marked GL Final in penciled letters. I slid it open. Inside were 2 shorthand pages, dense, tight, and unreadable to me without a decoder ring or 3 semesters of secretarial school. Still, it looked recent. I didn't pocket it. Wolfe hated that. I made a note of it and left it where it was. "Did anyone visit her lately?" I asked Mrs. Bell. "Sunday afternoon, I think. Gentleman caller. Thin, impatient, had a briefcase. She told me not to buzz him up, that she'd be right down. She left with him around 4. Never came back." "Could you describe him?" She thought. tidy, dark coat, nervous type. Wore glasses, I think. Maybe early 40s, didn't give his name. But the way she walked out, like it was business, not romance. I nodded, thanked her, and headed out. On the street, I filed the whole encounter under unsettling but not yet sinister. That shorthand note, the missing overnight bag, and a mystery man who took Emmeline away in broad daylight. Not great. By 1:15 I was back in the office. Wolfe was seated exactly where I'd left him, a new beer in hand, and the same scowl on his face. "She's not at the boarding house," I said, hanging up my coat. Room untouched, no sign of a struggle. Left Sunday with a man in a dark coat, no name, no return. "She departed with someone," Wolfe mused. "Voluntarily, under the guise of business, and she left no note." I gave him the rest, including the envelope with shorthand which I'd transcribed into my notes. She was working on something for Gregory Leeds, probably the final testament. But here's the corker. She didn't take her bag, not even a toothbrush, which suggests, Wolfe said, that she intended to return, but did not. He pressed his fingertips together. "We must identify this man. He is the conduit through which action became disappearance." I handed him the rest of Cray's list. "Next move? I could visit Mrs. Leeds, see how recently widowed she's feeling." He nodded. "Proceed, be circumspect. If she knows the testament has vanished with the typist, she may already be scheming." As I headed out again, Wolfe's voice stopped me at the door. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "this will not be a case of violence, but of premeditated misdirection. Do not expect bludgeons, expect lies." I tipped my hat and left him with his orchids and warnings. Wolfe could smell deception the way a hound smells fear, and if he was right, someone was lying through their expensively capped teeth. My job was to find out who and fast. It's a peculiar thing watching grief in real time. Some folks collapse like a house of cards, others get theatrical, sobbing into handkerchiefs, whispering about spirits and destiny. And then there are the Caroline Leeds types, the ones who treat mourning like a press conference, staged, managed, and suitable for framing. I rang the bell at her Park Avenue apartment at 2:15, expecting either tears or teeth. What I got was silk, pearls, and a greeting with less warmth than a frosted doorknob. "Yes?" she said, not moving aside. She was tall, angular, and carried herself like she'd been carved from ambition. "Archie Goodwin. I'm looking into the disappearance of a woman who worked for your late husband, Miss Emmeline Voss." Something flickered behind her eyes, a name she recognized, probably more than she'd admit. "I'm not sure I can help," she said, "but I suppose you'd like to try." She stepped aside. The apartment had a cold elegance to it, polished floors, long windows, no photographs, the kind of place where even the furniture seemed to whisper, "Don't touch." I followed her into a sitting room and waited while she poured herself a drink. Not an offer. Insight for me which told me where I stood. "She worked in your husband's firm," I said. "She's gone missing. Last seen Sunday afternoon. You ever meet her?" She sipped. "Once or twice, quiet little thing, efficient. And what was your husband dictating to her Sunday?" That got a longer pause. "He said it was paperwork for a trust revision." I didn't inquire. Gregory liked to play his cards close. "And when did he pass?" "Monday morning," she said. "He got up at 6, said he was going for a walk. The doorman found him in the lobby sitting on the bench. Heart failure. And you were where? She smiled, but there was no joy in it. Asleep. Which I regret now, Mr. Goodwin, if you're insinuating anything more. I let the silence hang a little, just enough to make her uncomfortable. Mrs. Leeds, your husband was preparing to change the structure of his legal legacy. Did he say why? She didn't answer right away. She looked at the window instead, as if expecting her late husband's ghost to drift in and explain everything himself. We argued, she said finally. Not about the will, about the firm. He was obsessed with appearances. The children, the legacy, the name on the wall. I told him it didn't matter if Barry or Sylvia got their feelings hurt. He didn't. Listen. So he planned to disinherit them, she shrugged. He never said the words, but he implied changes were coming. And you stood to benefit. I married him, Mr. Goodwin. I didn't poison him. I smiled. No. One mentioned poison. She looked at me then, sharp as a tack. They always do eventually. I left her with that drink in her hand and suspicion in the air. Back on the street, I scribbled a few notes. Caroline Leeds. Calm, rehearsed, evasive. Beneficiary? Probably. Expresses no surprise that Emmeline is missing. Possibly complicit. Possibly cold-blooded. Next stop, Barry Leeds. Barry worked from a WeWork-style office space a few blocks off Union Square, where buzzwords outnumber books, and every third person thinks they invented the concept of synergy. He greeted me in a sports coat and loafers, with the expression of a man who didn't get what he wanted for Christmas, and had been bitter about it ever since. My father's dead, he said by way of introduction. What do you want? Answers, I replied. About Emmeline Voss. She was last seen Sunday working on a confidential document with your father. Then she vanished. His eyebrows went up. I haven't seen her in a month. You sure? She didn't reach. Without say anything, try to warn you. Warn me about what? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Barry slumped into a chair and laced his fingers behind his neck. Look, my father and I weren't close. We tried, but he resented that I didn't go into law. He said consulting was for cowards. I said managing a legacy firm like his was just nepotism with better suits. We didn't see eye to eye. So you were out of the will? I assumed I was. Last time we spoke, he said something about reallocating priorities. That was Gregory speak for, I'm leaving it all to the blonde I married. Did you speak to Miss Voss recently? No. But I know Dad trusted her, more. Then he trusted me. He'd bring her up in conversations, how she never made typos, never forgot a date. Hell, I think she knew more about our finances than I ever did. That tracked. The more I learned about Miss Voss, the more she sounded like someone holding a grenade with a removed pin, quiet, composed, and ready to explode if you asked the wrong question. By late afternoon, I was on my way to the last name on the list, Sylvia Leeds. Unlike her brother, Sylvia hadn't gone corporate. She taught modern art at a small gallery on the west side. Her studio was a burst of color in a city full of gray, and she greeted me with paint on her fingers and a wary smile. I don't get many detectives, she said, unless you count the ones in books. This one's real, I replied. Miss Voss is missing. You may have known her? Of course, Sylvia said. I liked her. She was kind, smart, not like the legal drones Dad surrounded himself with. She remembered birthdays. Did you speak to her recently? Friday, she said. She came to see me, said she was worried. I perked up. About what? Sylvia wiped her hands on a cloth. She didn't say directly, but she hinted that she was caught in something bigger than she'd intended. Said my father made a request that upset her. She asked me what I thought of Caroline. What did you tell her? Sylvia hesitated. That I didn't trust her. Caroline married my father for the firm. She wanted control. That's all she ever wanted. Did you get the sense that Emmeline was afraid? Yes, she said. Not for her life, but for her integrity. She hated being part of something secret. That was it. The final puzzle piece for the day. I had 3 leads. One cold, one bitter, one honest. And I had a missing typist who may have been caught in a tug-of-war for a legal empire. I got back to the brownstone around 6. Wolfe was in the office, surrounded by silence, his 3rd beer halfway finished and his eyes closed. Not sleeping, just thinking the way he does when the world has done something distasteful again. I gave him the rundown. Every quote, every glance, every contradiction. He absorbed it all like a sponge made of disapproval. She visited Sylvia, he said, voice low. She sought moral clarity, which means she had lost confidence in the act. In the testament, I asked. In her role in it, Wolfe said. She knew it would not be buried quietly. She sensed consequence. I nodded. And the 3 leads? All have motive. Caroline benefits. Barry resents. Sylvia speaks too freely. Wolfe sat forward just enough to take another sip of beer. 3 suspects, he said. 1 missing girl and 1 dead man who left behind a storm in a sealed envelope. He tapped the desk. Summon Saul Panzer, quietly. That meant only one thing. The game had begun in earnest. I've followed enough people through Manhattan to know that everyone's got a pattern. They might not know it, but I do. Some look over their shoulders too much. Some never look at all. Some people think they're being clever by taking alternate routes, zigzagging across town like a paperboy on a deadline. But the smart ones don't run. They just wait until they can lie straight to your face. Wolfe had dispatched Saul Panzer the moment I'd finished relaying what the Leeds family had given me. Saul didn't need instructions, not really. He could sniff out a deception faster than Fritz could burn an omelette. But while Saul worked from the shadows, I was tasked with the face-to-face footwork, the kind that leaves you half a shoe down and emotionally overdrawn. Wolfe wanted answers from the firm of Crayon Leeds, and not just the kind you get from a nervous administrator with a dry throat. We needed to see who had access to Emmeline's files, who knew she was working Sunday, and who might have made her disappear before those shorthand notes became a bombshell with a typewritten fuse. So the next morning, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Crayon Leeds office with the confidence of a man who's not pretending to belong. The reception area looked like it had been decorated by someone with a discount account at a mahogany warehouse. Too much polish, not enough warmth. I gave the name Archie Goodwin and was met with the kind of professional freeze-out that tells you your reputation has preceded you and no one's thrilled about it. The receptionist was a tight-lipped blonde with nails like bayonets and the posture of someone who had been told to expect trouble. I'd like to speak with the associates, I said, specifically those who were in the building on Sunday. She pursed her lips. We don't usually allow non-clients to interview staff. That's fine, I said, flashing my most winning smile. I'm not here for usual. I'm here because your star typist went missing, and your late senior partner may have been rearranging everyone's financial future in the process. That got a blink. Then she picked up the phone and muttered something into the receiver. A few minutes later, a young man in his 30s stepped out. Crisp suit, tailored within an inch of its inseam, and a frown that suggested his coffee had betrayed him. "I'm Charles Endicott," he said, "one of the junior partners. Mr. Cray said you might come sniffing around." "Then let's not disappoint him," I said. "Tell me about Sunday." He sighed and led me to a corner office, modest but clean. Once we were seated, he leaned back and gave me a look of performative exhaustion. "I wasn't here Sunday," he said. "I had theatre tickets. Ask my girlfriend." "Thrilling," I said. "But Miss Voss was. Who else came in?" "I don't know. The building logs visitors, not staff. You'd need to speak to the security desk." "I will. But let's pretend you're not hiding behind clerical reports. What do you know about the testament Gregory Leeds was preparing?" He went still. Too still. "I know he didn't consult any of us. He was secretive. That was his style." "And what was your impression of Miss Voss?" "Efficient. Too efficient sometimes. The kind of person who notices when the pencil draws out of alignment." Kept to herself. But she had principles. Defined principles. She wouldn't falsify things, wouldn't backdate memos. Last year, one of the associates tried to have her revise a client memo post-signature. She reported it, quietly but firmly. Leeds admired her for that. So Emmeline was loyal, but not blindly. Wolfe would love that. I made a note. "Anyone here have a reason to shut her up?" I asked. His mouth twitched. "You're implying foul play." "Fast to you. I'm implying someone wanted her quiet. Whether she walked out or was walked out is what I'm here to determine." He didn't answer that, which told me enough. Next up was the security guard, who sat behind a reinforced desk in the lobby, with the alertness of a man who'd watched the same glass doors open and close for too many years. "Sunday," he said, squinting. "Yeah, she came in around 2. Miss Voss. Signed the log. Went straight up." "Anyone else?" He checked. The sheet. "Mr. Leeds, that's Gregory. He came in just before her and... wait." He pointed to a scrawl 2 lines down. "W. Driscoll." That was a new name. "Who's Driscoll?" "No idea. Didn't work here. Might have been a client. Didn't stay long." "Male? Female?" "Male. Middle-aged. Glasses. Didn't speak much." The mystery man again, this time with a name. I jotted it down. "Security cameras?" I asked. He shook his head. "Only in the lobby. We don't have coverage upstairs. Lawyers like privacy." I thanked him and stepped outside into the kind of wind that makes you want to re-evaluate your life choices. Wolfe would be at home, warm and bloated with breakfast, already spinning connections between Caroline Leeds and a typist's vanished trail. But I had a few more knots to untie before checking in. I called Saul from the sidewalk. "Got anything?" I asked. "More than you'll like," he said. "Miss Voss withdrew $200 in cash from her bank account Sunday morning. No. Bags, no luggage, just walked out with it and got in a cab." "Where to?" "Driver says East Midtown, dropped her on a side street near a private club. Guess who was seen arriving 15 minutes later?" "Do tell." "W. Driscoll." Real name, Walter Driscoll, financial advisor. Known to the late Gregory Leeds. Played tennis with Barry Leeds, retired last year. Rumor has it Leeds owed him a favor. That was enough to make my neck itch. "She walked into the club with him." "No. He went in alone. She walked in the other direction. But security cameras saw them leave together 2 hours later. She looked shaken. He looked smug. Where'd they go? Vanished. No camera caught their exit, but I got plates from his car. Tracked him to a townhouse. In Gramercy. Lights on, curtains closed, no sign of her. I swore under my breath. Good work, Saul. Keep an eye on the place. No contact. You got it. By the time I returned to the brownstone, the city was losing the battle against the early evening fog. Inside, Wolfe hadn't moved, except to shift books. The ETE office smelled of orchids and beer, his two constants. She was seen leaving with Driscoll, I said. Financial type. Tied to Barry Leeds. They met at a private club, disappeared together, and now he's holed up in Gramercy with the blinds drawn. Wolfe's lips tightened. A man with something to hide. Maybe a testament, maybe a typist, or perhaps both. He stood, not fully, but enough to lean forward. Mr. Goodwin, tomorrow we shall confront Mr. Driscoll. That meant one thing. The brownstone was preparing for battle. By the next morning the fog had lifted from the streets, but not from the case. Inside the brownstone the world still turned on its usual axis. Fritz preparing eggs à la Russe, Wolfe in his chair before the orchids, and me fielding the phone like a switchboard operator during a blackout. But beneath the routine, things had shifted. Wolfe was engaged now, which meant the temperature of the whole house had dropped 5 degrees, and the air smelled faintly of strategy. I gave him the early update from Saul, who had kept watch on Walter Driscoll's townhouse throughout the night. No one had come or gone, no lights, no movement, just the faint, constant presence of a man waiting for the world to forget him, or for someone to come knocking. Wolfe tapped his forefinger against the arm of his chair. Then we knock, he said. It wasn't an invitation, it was a directive. So at 10:15, I took a cab to Gramercy Park with a clean shirt, an old badge, and a fresh pot of bluff. The Driscoll place was an elegant 3-story number with ivy that looked professionally discouraged and windows that didn't, like being stared at. I rang the bell twice before the door opened a cautious inch. "Mr. Driscoll?" I asked. The man who appeared behind the door was textbook respectable. Thin wire glasses, a neatly pressed sweater vest, and a posture that suggested he'd been storing tension since the Hoover administration. He didn't open the door more than necessary. "Yes?" "Archie Goodwin. I work with Nero Wolfe." The name had an effect. His lips pressed together like someone had just handed him a telegram from the past. "What's this regarding?" "A missing typist, Emmeline Voss." He blinked slowly. "I don't know where she is." "No one said you did. But you saw her Sunday." I may have, briefly." "We have footage," I added. "You leaving the Astoria Club with her, 2 hours after she arrived." He opened the door fully, stepped back and waved me in. The foyer smelled of old wood polish and something faintly citrus, lemons or nerves, hard to tell. "I don't want trouble," he said. "That's good," I replied, "because trouble has a lousy disposition." He led me into a sitting room with stiff furniture and a grandfather clock that ticked like it knew secrets. Driscoll sat in the edge of an armchair and looked everywhere but at me. "She came to me," he said, "Sunday morning. Said she needed advice. She was scared." "Of what?" He hesitated. "She didn't say. Only that Gregory Leeds had dictated something that would alter several lives. She said she'd typed the draft but hadn't turned it in, so it wasn't delivered to the firm. No, she was debating whether to destroy it. Did you encourage her to? He looked at me sharply. No, I told her to do. What she felt was right, that if she believed in the man's intentions, she should see them through. And what did she do after that? She left. That's all. I haven't seen her since. I didn't press. I could smell the lie. But it wasn't the kind that broke under pressure. It needed leverage, and Wolfe was better at finding those than a diamond cutter. I thanked him, left my card, and returned to the brownstone with more questions than answers. Wolfe listened without speaking, his eyes half-lidded in contemplation. "He lies," he said once I'd finished. "Definitely," I agreed. "But why lie if you're not guilty?" "Perhaps guilt and motive are not the same," Wolfe said. "He may be shielding someone or something." That afternoon I took another look at the notes Emmeline had left behind, the ones I'd seen in her room. Wolfe had asked me to retrieve a copy from the landlady with careful handling. She'd agreed, reluctantly, on the condition that they be returned once reviewed. The shorthand pages were tight, clean, and methodical. Wolfe couldn't read them, and neither could I. But there was something strange about the way the lines ended. Some pages had abrupt stops, as if something had been cut off mid-thought. Wolfe leaned over the page without touching it. "She was interrupted," he said, "perhaps deliberately." I nodded. Or perhaps she knew she was being watched. That night something happened that changed the tone of the case entirely. It was Fritz who noticed it first. He entered the office with the same calm manner he always used to announce dinner. But this time he didn't mention trout amandine or garlic-creamed spinach. He held something out to me. "This was on the kitchen counter," he said. It was a small envelope. No stamp, no name. Just a blank cream-colored fold sealed with an old-fashioned wax drop. I opened it with care. Inside was a single typed sentence. "She has what she shouldn't. Silence her, or others will." Wolfe didn't speak for several seconds. Then he said quietly, "Where exactly was this found?" "Near the spice rack," Fritz answered. "It wasn't there earlier." "That might sound like nothing to you, but in the brownstone the kitchen is sacred ground. Not even I wander in without announcing myself." The fact that someone had crossed that line and left a veiled threat meant Wolfe's fortress had been breached. Not physically, necessarily, but symbolically. And Wolfe hated symbols when they trespassed. "I want the locks changed," he said. "Today." I made the calls. Saul returned late in the evening with more news. He'd traced a withdrawal made from Emmeline's bank account the morning of her disappearance, but not just the one we knew about. There had been another. A small, quiet wire transfer deposited into a secondary account, one she hadn't used in over 2 years. "Who authorized it?" Wolfe asked. Saul handed him a slip. "The signature is digital, but the authorization code traces back to Barry Leeds." That was the crack. Wolfe didn't react, but I saw it register behind his eyes. He leaned, back fingers steepled. "So Mr. Barry Leeds," he said softly, "had financial access, and Miss Voss received uncharacteristic funds hours before she vanished." He closed his eyes. "She was bribed. Or paid to vanish," I added. Wolfe opened his eyes. "Or paid to stay silent." Outside, the city moved on without us. Cars passed, lights changed, deals were made. But inside the brownstone, the pressure had shifted. We weren't dealing with a simple disappearance anymore. This was something else, a slow burn, a quiet war, and somewhere beneath the calm surface, the true testament still waited. Emmeline Voss had typed something someone wanted buried. And someone else, someone inside the House of Leeds, was willing to trespass to keep it buried. Wolfe rang for Fritz. "I want a list of all visitors to this house in the past week," he said. Fritz bowed and left. I leaned forward. "You think the note was placed today?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think it was placed 2 days ago, when Cray visited, and I think we missed it, until now." I frowned. "Then it wasn't just a threat." "No," he said. "It was a warning, but not for me, for you. If you've ever had someone threaten you using your own kitchen, you'll know it changes the atmosphere, even if the threat is quiet, just a sentence slipped among the spice. Jars. You start looking at corners differently. That's what the brownstone felt like after Fritz found that envelope. It wasn't panic. Wolfe doesn't do panic. But there was a new tension in the air, like the place was holding its breath. Wolfe had ordered a review of every visitor in the past week. Fritz, ever the archivist of domestic routine, delivered a tidy list before noon the next day. Wolfe read it silently, then passed it to me with a tap of the finger. The list wasn't long. Cray's visit topped it, followed by the usual deliveryman, a rare drop-in from Inspector Kramer, and one outlier, a courier named Edwin Mott, who had delivered a package of legal books Wolfe hadn't ordered. "Do you recall receiving this package?" Wolfe asked. I thought back. "Yeah. Monday morning. Brown paper wrap tied with twine. Came from a used book supplier in Chelsea. I figured you ordered more case law tomes for show." "I did not," Wolfe said, "and I dislike twine." That checked out. Wolfe preferred precision. He'd once refused to open a package because it arrived with Scotch tape. "What was in it?" I asked. 2 volumes, unmarked, dusty, not catalogued." He pointed to the bookshelf behind him. I retrieved the books. One was a civil code commentary from 1932. The other, a slim black volume, was a diary, unlabeled, unpaginated. I opened it. The pages were blank, except for one. In the middle of the book, a single page had been typed with Emmeline Voss's name. No message, no date. Just her name, centered with no punctuation. Cold and clean. "Subtle," I muttered. "Intentional," Wolfe replied. "It was never meant to inform, it was meant to signal." "To who?" "To me," he said, "and now to you." He didn't explain further, which was his way of letting me stew until I figured it out myself. That afternoon, I decided it was time to pay another visit to Barry Leeds. We hadn't spoken since I learned about the transfer from his authorization code. That little act of generosity toward Emmeline Voss, if that's what it was, hadn't come up in our first meeting, which meant it had been deliberate omission, and omissions in my line of work ring louder than lies. His office was busier, this time. I had to wait 10 minutes while he wrapped up a meeting with 2 associates, both of whom looked like they'd recently lost arguments to a spreadsheet. When Barry finally emerged, he gave me the same weary smile as before. "I thought we covered everything," he said. "Turns out we missed a detail," I replied. "A financial one. Care to explain why you authorized a quiet deposit into Miss Voss's secondary account the morning she vanished?" He blinked, then frowned. "I didn't," he said. "At least, I didn't think I did. Not the kind of thing most people do by accident." He scratched the back of his neck. I gave her a bonus off the books. My father hated using firm money for private favors. She helped me out once. Proofread a speech, edited a few investor briefs. I figured it was worth a thank you. And you chose the exact morning she disappeared to express your gratitude. His frown deepened. I didn't know she'd disappear. That's the tricky thing about timing. In hindsight, it always looks suspicious. He stood, paced to the window, then turned back to me. Listen, I didn't hurt her. I didn't want anything from her. She was careful. Too careful. I think she knew something was going to happen and didn't want to be part of it. Happen like what? He hesitated. There was talk, around the firm, that my father was planning to make some drastic changes, legal ones. I figured it was about the trust, but then I started hearing other things, rumors. About? Walter Driscoll. He'd been visiting the office quietly, at odd hours, said it was personal business, but Emmeline said he'd requested certain client files, old ones. I made a note. He was no longer active with the firm. Not officially, but you know how it goes. Old friends, buried favors. My father kept people around when it suited him. That matched with what we'd heard, but still didn't explain why Driscoll had been so eager to bury his interaction with Emmeline. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without blinking. When I mentioned the diary, he asked to see it again. "Observe the binding," he said. "It's glued, not stitched." So, someone removed pages, he said. Likely recent. The glue is uneven, the residue faint. He opened the cover carefully. "This was once full," he said, "and now it is not." The next hour was spent combing through everything Emmeline had left behind, her notebooks, her folders, the typed sheets Wolfe had obtained through Mrs. Bell. And as we did, Fritz came into the room again, this time without the usual polite knock. "I've just gone to refill the spice rack," he said quietly, "and something is missing." "Missing?" Wolfe's voice dropped an octave. "The small glass jar with white coriander seeds. It is always third from the left. Now it is gone." I looked at Wolfe. He looked at me, the kitchen again. A single, small, seemingly meaningless item, removed. No note. No sound. Just gone. Wolfe stood. That doesn't happen often, and when it does, it's not casual. "Someone has been inside," he said. "Again, and this time they've taken rather than left." "The coriander?" I asked. "Not the item, the message. The act is symbolic. Then we're being toyed with." He nodded. "Precisely." I called Saul, gave him a list of everyone who'd had access to the brownstone over the past week. He promised to follow the trail, starting with Edwin Mott, the so-called book courier, who may or may not exist in any legitimate registry. Wolfe spent the next hour in silence, then finally spoke. "Mr. Goodwin, we are no longer investigating a disappearance. We are unraveling a siege." That night I checked the locks twice before bed. Not because I was scared, but because I was annoyed. Whoever was behind this thought they were playing a game. And while Wolfe plays many things, language, logic, even fate, he does not play games when it comes to his home. The next day, Wolfe made a call. Not to a client, not to a suspect. He called Inspector Kramer, and that meant we weren't just hunting anymore. We were preparing for war. The thing about Nero Wolfe is he doesn't chase, not people, not cars, not even clues. He doesn't pace, doesn't panic, and doesn't bite unless the jaws of logic are already halfway shut. What he does, what he's always done, is tighten the web from the center, pulling the strings until everyone dances into place without realizing they've been caught. And that's exactly what he started doing the moment he hung up on Inspector Kramer. Yes, hang up. Wolfe doesn't wait for pleasantries. He makes his demands and ends the call before the protest has time to bloom. That's how we ended up expecting a visit from Manhattan's least patient homicide inspector, a man Wolfe aggravates like vinegar on a paper cut. I had just finished logging the timeline of the 2 break-ins, the envelope left in the kitchen and the missing coriander jar, when the doorbell rang. Fritz, unshaken as always, opened it and announced, "Inspector Kramer." Kramer barreled into the front room like a storm in a badly knotted tie. His overcoat was half-buttoned, his face flushed with the particular anger he reserved for Wolfe's requests, which was saying something because Wolfe almost never requests anything. "You'd better have a damn good reason," Kramer growled, his cigar already chewed down to the soggy end. "I left a meeting with the commissioner to be here." Wolfe didn't rise, of course not. He gestured toward the red chair and spoke as if discussing weather patterns. "Inspector, sit. Mr. Goodwin will brief you." I took over, reciting the chain of events like a courtroom transcript, Emmeline Voss's disappearance, the testament dictated by Gregory Leeds, the appearance of Walter Driscoll, the mysterious book delivery, the tampered spice jar, and finally the veiled threat typed on an anonymous slip and left in Wolfe's sanctuary. Kramer sat through all of it, eyes narrowed, mouth tight. When I finished, he let the silence hang before stabbing the air with his cigar. "You're saying someone broke into this house? Twice?" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and not to steal, to send a message." "That's ridiculous. No one would be stupid enough to—" "Inspector," Wolfe interrupted, "the stupidity of a criminal is often eclipsed only by his confidence in the ignorance of others. Whoever entered this house did so because he believes himself undetectable." Kramer grunted. "And you're roping me in because—" "Because the case has grown beyond the scope of a missing person," Wolfe said. "Miss Voss may be alive or she may not. Either way, obstruction has occurred, interference, perhaps conspiracy, possibly blackmail. You have evidence?" "I have pattern," Wolfe said. "Pattern leads to evidence." Kramer puffed out a long breath and stood. "Fine, I'll poke around. But if you're wasting my time—" Wolfe closed his eyes. "I never waste time. Only patience." When Kramer left, Wolfe issued new instructions. They weren't loud. They never are. But the brownstone shifted again. We were no longer collecting facts. We were laying bait. "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "you will invite Caroline Leeds to the brownstone tomorrow, at 10 sharp. Be clear that this is not a request. Inform her that I have information about Gregory's final legal intentions, and that her absence would be considered obstruction." "Sounds like a threat," I said. "It is," Wolfe replied. "A polite one." "Who else?" "Invite Mortimer Cray, and Barry Leeds, and Sylvia, if you please. But not Driscoll. Not yet. He shall be the final movement." I made the calls that evening. Cray was hesitant but obedient. Sylvia agreed without hesitation, though I heard the edge in her voice. Barry tried to stall. I didn't let him. Caroline was silent for a long moment after I delivered Wolfe's message. Then she said, "I'll come," and hung up. That night, the brownstone was like the eye of a storm. Calm, quiet, but undeniably bracing for impact. Wolfe didn't sleep, at least not fully. He sat in his office reading old letters from Leeds, cross-referencing details with Emmeline's notes, tracing threads I couldn't see yet. Fritz, sensing the gravity, prepared only cold food, cucumber soup and poached trout. Because when Wolfe thinks he dislikes heat. Around midnight, Saul called in. "I've located Edwin Mott," he said. "Real courier, but he was paid in cash to make that delivery. Didn't ask questions. Gave the package to someone on the sidewalk. Claims the man was holding identification marked N.W. Wolfe. Said it looked official." "Which it wasn't," I muttered. "No, it was a forgery. High quality. Wolfe's name, but not his format." So, someone impersonated one of Wolfe's people to get into the chain of delivery. Exactly. And Mott remembered something. Else, the guy who handed him the package? Tall, tan coat, narrow glasses, same description as your mystery man, Driscoll. After I hung up, I delivered the news to Wolfe. He didn't look surprised. Just reassured, like a theory had been confirmed. He sat back in his chair, fingertips together. "Tomorrow," he said softly, "the net begins to close." The next morning I was up before sunrise. By the time Fritz brought Wolfe his beer at 8, the office was spotless and the extra chairs arranged in a semicircle. Wolfe, seated in the center, looked like the high priest of logic, ready to preside over a ritual of uncomfortable truth. At 9:58, Cray arrived, pale, sweaty, still carrying that battered briefcase like it was a life preserver. I led him in and seated him on the far left. At 10:01, Caroline arrived. Gloves, pearls, and a look that could freeze boiling water. She nodded at no one and took the chair furthest from Cray. Sylvia arrived a few minutes later, visibly tense. She clutched her handbag like it might explode if she let go. Barry was last. And late. He sauntered in at 10:12 with a smirk and a complaint about traffic. Wolfe didn't acknowledge the excuse. He simply gestured. "Ladies, gentlemen, you are here because I permitted you to be. Mr. Goodwin will now recount the facts as we understand them." I stood, faced the room and told the story. All of it. From Leeds's last dictation to Emmeline's disappearance. From the envelope in the kitchen to the vanished coriander jar. From the bank transfer to the courier deception. I didn't point fingers, I just laid out the pieces and let the silence stretch. Then Wolfe spoke again. "Someone here," he said, "knows where Miss Voss is, and someone here fears what she knows." Caroline scoffed. "You can't possibly expect us to—" "I expect nothing," Wolfe said. "I know." And in that moment I saw the shift. Barry sat forward. Cray blinked rapidly. Sylvia's breath hitched. But it was Caroline who showed her hand. Her fingers twitched, just once, toward her purse. Not toward anything dangerous. Just habit. Reflex. A reaction you can't fake. Wolfe nodded. Only once. The final act had begun. There's a sound that silence makes when it's loaded. Thick, waiting, sharp around the edges. That's what filled Wolfe's office the moment he said, "I know." And it wasn't just theatrics. When Wolfe says that, he means it. He doesn't bluff, he doesn't speculate in public, and he doesn't open a performance without knowing how the curtain will drop. I stood by the globe near the door, arms folded, watching the suspects in their assigned seats, like a row of reluctant jurors waiting to see who gets called to the stand first. Wolfe sat back in his chair, fingers steepled, under his chin, eyes half-lidded but missing nothing. "You will forgive." "The drama," he said, his voice level. "It is an unfortunate necessity when dealing with deception." Caroline Leeds tilted her chin. "Mr. Wolfe, if this is a game—" "It is not," Wolfe said. "It is a narrowing, a matter of logic, applied with care. The disappearance of Miss Emmeline Voss is not an accident nor a spontaneous act. It was calculated, cold, deliberate." He let that sink in before continuing. "We begin with motive. Gregory Leeds, deceased, prepared a testament that altered the structure of his estate and business. The details are not widely known because Miss Voss, the typist, was the sole witness to its contents. That alone made her a target." Barry shifted in his seat. "You don't know that she didn't run off on her own?" "No," Wolfe said, "but I know someone wanted us to believe she did." He glanced at me. I opened the file I'd prepared. "The bank records," I said, "show that Miss Voss received 2 deposits the day she vanished. One, $200 in cash. She withdrew herself. The second, a wire transfer, came from an account under Barry Leeds's authorization." Barry opened his mouth, but Wolfe held up a finger. "Mr. Leeds claims this was a personal gesture. Perhaps it was, but the timing is suspicious. It coincided with the last known sighting of Miss Voss, leaving a private club with Walter Driscoll, a man connected to this family in subtle and unspoken ways." Cray cleared his throat. "You said Emmeline typed the testament, but we haven't seen a copy." "No," Wolfe said, "because she didn't deliver it." He turned to Caroline. "You, Mrs. Leeds, were aware of Gregory's intentions." She didn't blink. "I had suspicions. You had more than that. You knew he intended to leave the firm in your hands. And you also knew such a change would provoke resistance. So you acted, not with violence, but with subtle influence. You enlisted Walter Driscoll." Caroline's brow twitched. "You're accusing me of conspiring with a man I barely know?" "Not barely," Wolfe said. "Intimately, financially. Driscoll was your late husband's confidant, yes, but he was also your advisor. He oversaw quiet investments in your name, investments Gregory Leeds did not know about. We traced them." That landed. She didn't reply. Wolfe continued. "You couldn't control the testament, but you could suppress it. Emmeline Voss, principled as she was, could not be bought, but she could be frightened. Driscoll was the instrument. He intercepted her after she left Sylvia Leeds. They met at the club. She was shaken. Then she vanished." Sylvia's voice cracked. "Do you know where she is?" Wolfe nodded once. "Yes." That one word turned the room. Every face snapped toward him. "She is safe," Wolfe said. "Recovering, hidden, by someone who did not trust the police. Someone who feared that returning Emmeline to public view would place her in further danger." He let that hang, then turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, if you will." I crossed the room and opened the side door to the hallway. A few steps away, Emmeline Voss stood waiting, pale, thin, but steady. She walked in with the caution of someone re-entering a world she had nearly escaped from. Everyone rose from their chairs. Even Wolfe leaned slightly forward. Cray let out a long breath. My God! Barry stared. Sylvia stood in stunned silence. Caroline Leeds, to her credit, barely moved. "Miss Voss," Wolfe said, "you are safe. Speak if you choose." Emmeline looked around the room, her voice quiet but clear. "I was afraid," she said, "not just of what I heard, but what I realized. Gregory wanted to make things right. He felt guilty for the way he treated his children, for the secrets. He dictated a testament that stripped Caroline of control and gave it to a neutral party, Cray." Cray turned visibly white. He believed Cray was ethical, incorruptible. She looked at Caroline. "He didn't trust you anymore. He told me in private that he suspected you were planning something behind his back, something involving the firm's assets." Caroline folded her hands. "And yet here we are, with no testament, just words." Emmeline reached into her handbag and produced a sealed envelope. She handed it to Wolfe. "I hid the carbon copy. I wasn't sure who to trust. Not until Mr. Goodwin found me." Wolfe opened the envelope, scanned the document, and nodded. "It is authentic," he said. "Legally binding if witnessed, and Miss Voss, knowing the risk, ensured it was." He gestured to the others. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is the truth. Whether it comforts or condemns is not my concern." Kramer entered just then, having been summoned to wait in the kitchen. He took one look at Emmeline, the envelope, and Caroline's face, and said, "You're going to have to explain all this, slowly." Wolfe leaned back. "I believe, Inspector, the testimony just delivered will suffice, and the carbon copy in your hand will make the rest inevitable." Caroline stood. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one," Kramer said. "You'll need 3. The others began to leave. Cray stunned, Barry silent, Sylvia weeping quietly as she squeezed Emmeline's hand. I stood near the door, letting the quiet settle again. Wolfe didn't say much, just closed his eyes and breathed. Another siege. Broken. It's not often that Nero Wolfe says the word inevitable. He avoids it the way most men avoid root canals, because inevitability suggests surrender to fate, and Wolfe does not surrender. He bends things, breaks them, reconstructs them until they make sense. But when he handed the carbon copy of Gregory, Leeds's testament to Inspector Kramer, and said inevitable, there was something final in the tone. The curtain had lowered. The puzzle was complete, or at least almost. After Kramer had escorted Caroline Leeds from the brownstone, with a pair of uniformed officers trailing behind, and Barry muttering into his sleeves, we closed the doors and returned to Wolfe's office. The quiet felt earned. Emmeline Voss sat in the guest chair, spine straight, hands folded neatly in her lap like she was still in a courtroom transcription pool. Wolfe regarded her not as a victim, but as a custodian, someone who had protected not just a document, but a man's intent. He gestured toward the tray Fritz had placed on the side table. "Tea, Miss Voss, and a scone. You've earned something gentle." She managed a faint smile. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe." I poured the tea. Not because I've gone soft, but because I figured she'd had enough people trying to take things from her. Doing something simple, pouring a cup, felt like restoring some kind of balance. Wolfe, meanwhile, turned his gaze to me. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you will compile a full report for the district attorney. Include transcripts of today's discussion, bank records, courier testimony, and Miss Voss's statement. Omit personal reflections." I nodded. "No. Poetic license, got it. And Saul. He's already tracing the shell accounts used for the investment transfers, the ones Driscoll managed on Caroline's behalf. Good. He turned back to Emmeline. You did not have to return, yet you did. Why? She took a long breath. Because I realized what silence would cost. Indeed, but you also understood the danger. I did. And yet you entrusted Mr. Goodwin with your location. Her voice was steady now. He asked the right questions, and he didn't ask them like he wanted to win. He asked them like he wanted the truth. I cleared my throat. I'll take that as a compliment. Wolfe didn't respond. He merely gave me a sideways glance that said, "Don't let it go to your head." The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. Kramer called once to confirm that Caroline had requested counsel and refused to speak further without it. Barry and Sylvia were no longer persons of interest, though Wolfe made a point of instructing me to keep an eye on Barry's financial behavior in case guilt is a delayed infection. Cray, for his part, submitted a formal request to activate the provisions of Gregory Leeds's revised testament, placing the firm's stewardship in his hands, as outlined in the document. Emmeline had protected, but that night, as the brownstone finally settled into the quiet rhythm it preferred, Fritz cleaning the kitchen, orchids basking in their artificial sunlight, and Wolfe in his chair with a beer at his side, there remained one piece out of place. "What about Driscoll?" I asked. "You never said whether we'll see charges." Wolfe didn't look up. "He will not be charged." "Why not?" "He helped coordinate a cover-up, possibly tampered with a delivery service. At the very least, he intimidated a witness." Wolfe sighed. "Driscoll is cunning, but he was not the author of this scheme. He was a servant, a middleman. He acted from loyalty, misguided, yes, but loyalty nonetheless." "And that gets him a pass?" "No," Wolfe said. "But it places him beneath the threshold of guilt I concern myself with." He took a slow sip of beer. "You must learn to distinguish between the orchestrator and the echo. Driscoll was an echo. Caroline was the source, and the source has been routed." He spoke with that particular finality of his, the kind that didn't need an argument, because it already contained its own rebuttal. But I wasn't done. "There's one thing still bothering me." "Only one?" "The coriander." That got a flicker in his eye. "Ah, yes." "I've been thinking," I said. "You said it wasn't about the spice. It was about the message. But what kind of message is that? Stealing a spice jar, that's not intimidation, it's not a threat." "No," Wolfe said, "it's an assertion." I leaned forward. "Of what?" "Presence," Wolfe said. "Control. Whoever took it wanted us to know they had been inside without needing to say it outright. A note might have been intercepted. A sound might have alerted Fritz. But a missing object, subtle, quiet, unmistakable to the observant, was more effective." He closed his eyes for a moment. "And it worked. It confirmed that our adversary was not impulsive, but strategic. That Caroline Leeds was not merely angry or opportunistic, but methodical. She planned her steps in symbols, not actions. That, Mr. Goodwin, is what made her dangerous." I nodded. "Until she slipped." "She did not slip," Wolfe said. "She overplayed. There is a difference." I let that sit for a moment, then stood. "Dinner. Cold roast beef. French beans. Fritz's discretion." I started, toward the door but paused. "You think she planned the whole thing beginning to end?" Wolfe looked up. No. She planned the testament's suppression," he said. "She planned the intimidation, but she did not plan on Miss Voss's integrity. She assumed, wrongly, that fear would prevail, and it did not." I nodded. "You ever surprised by the good in people?" Wolfe gave me a look that could have been annoyance or faint amusement. "Occasionally, it is inconvenient." That was his version of a compliment. I left him with his roast beef and his moral ambivalence and stepped into the hall. Emmeline was in the front room, seated quietly, looking out the window at the city beyond. She didn't speak and I didn't press her, but she looked different now. Not shaken, not hunted, just finished, like someone who'd done what they came to do. I fetched my coat and hat and headed for the door. Behind me, the brownstone exhaled. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with that subtle peace that only comes when a siege is lifted. The truth has been spoken, and Nero Wolfe has won, not by force, but by knowing. The thing about resolution is, it doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it's just a long breath, taken in a room that finally feels still. That's what the brownstone felt like in the days that followed the unmasking of Caroline Leeds. Not triumphant. Not boastful, just quiet. Purpose fulfilled, balance restored. Wolfe didn't gloat. He never does. Victory to him is not a thing to wave around like a parade banner. It's a natural conclusion. The same way gravity is not a celebration, but an inevitability. He had set a sequence in motion, tightened every screw, and when the whole contraption finally clicked shut, he simply turned back to his orchids as if he'd merely watered the begonias. Emmeline Voss stayed in the city for 2 more days. We arranged for her to stay in a modest hotel in Midtown. Nothing fancy, but safe, and within reach if Wolfe needed to summon her for further clarification. Fritz delivered lunch to her once, which made more of an impression than all my careful questions. She seemed steadier now, and maybe even a little proud, though she didn't say so. I saw it in her walk, in the way she carried that handbag again. Not like it might explode, but like it held something worth guarding. I saw her off at the train station the next morning. She was heading to New Haven, where a cousin had offered her a temporary place to stay. Something quieter. She wasn't sure she'd return to legal work. "I may teach," she said as we waited on the platform, "or write. Something that doesn't require silence in the presence of power." "You're good at words," I told her, "even when you don't use them." She smiled. "You're not bad yourself, Mr. Goodwin. Tell Mr. Wolfe. Thank you. In your own way." She boarded the train without looking back, and I watched until the last car faded behind the curve of the track. When I returned to the brownstone, it was business as usual. Wolfe was deep into a monograph on the moral inconsistencies of 18th century French magistrates, and had already finished his second beer. Fritz had just returned from the market, carrying produce with the reverence usually reserved for crown jewels, and the orchids had been rotated 2 degrees to the left for afternoon symmetry. I gave my report. Wolfe listened, eyes closed, nodding, occasionally grunting once. "She's gone," I finished, "but I think she'll be all right. She has integrity," Wolfe said. "It is a scarce resource, and exhausting." She mentioned teaching. He opened one eye. "A worthy alternative to transcription. There is no future in being the mouthpiece of men. You might put that on a pillow, I said. He didn't respond. We had a light dinner that night, stuffed. Endives with roasted walnuts, followed by a modest veal cutlet and some caramelized pears that Fritz pretended were a last-minute inspiration, though I'd seen him prepping them since Thursday. After dinner, I returned to the office with a fresh folder in hand, the compiled case file, timelines, witness statements, banking evidence, a clean copy of the revised testament. It was all there, laid out like the blueprint of a storm we had weathered and outlasted. I placed it on Wolfe's desk. He didn't look at it immediately. He was studying one of the orchids with the kind of scrutiny most men reserve for cross-examining witnesses or writing alimony checks. Finally he spoke. You see now why I hesitated at the beginning. I leaned against the edge of the desk. Because it wasn't murder. No, Wolfe said, because it was a matter of ethics, and ethics are more elusive than crime. He glanced at the folder. This was not about who killed whom. It was about whose silence was most valuable and what it cost to preserve it. You think Caroline would have followed through if we hadn't gotten involved? She would have tried, he said, but even successful conspiracies erode. The truth is not a candle to be snuffed once. It relights in drafty corners. He leaned back, hands folded on his stomach. Miss Voss represented the one thing Caroline Leeds could never control, a conscience. There was no judgment in his voice, just fact. Would you have taken the case if Cray hadn't begged? I asked. I did not take it because he begged, Wolfe replied. I took it because something about his demeanor suggested he was hiding behind bureaucracy, not deceit. There is a difference, and I was curious. Curiosity. The most dangerous appetite Wolfe allowed himself. It was rare, and almost always meant something worth chasing. Later that night I sat by the window with a book I wasn't really reading. Outside, the city pulsed the way it always does, uncaring and unforgiving. But for once the brownstone felt separated from it, not untouched but intact, like the storm had tried and failed to breach the walls. The phone rang once around 10. Wolfe answered, which was rare after dinner. It was Kramer. He spoke for less than 3 minutes. Wolfe gave only one-word responses. Then he hung up and sat quietly for a moment. What's the verdict? I asked. Driscoll has disappeared. Ran? Possibly. Or simply retired. He left a note. No forwarding address. Think he'll resurface? No, Wolfe said. But men like him always linger, not in presence, but in influence. He will be replaced. I didn't argue. Wolfe looked at me then, and for once there was no sarcasm in the gaze. You did well, Archie. I blinked. You all right? Fever? I rarely say it, he said, because it should be presumed. I laughed. Let's not make it a habit. We sat in companionable silence after that. Me with my unturned pages, Wolfe with his untouched beer, and the city outside continuing as if nothing remarkable had happened. But something had. A typist had vanished, a testament had surfaced, and a lie had unraveled, quietly, completely, and without a single raised voice. In Wolfe's world, that's not just a conclusion, it's justice. Most people think the end of a case means peace, that you pack up the files, breathe deep, maybe even take a stroll without looking over your shoulder. But the truth is, endings in our line of work aren't clean. They leave residue, quiet doubts, hanging threads, unanswered questions that didn't quite fit the frame. And when it comes to Nero Wolfe, he doesn't let those threads dangle. He plucks them one by one until the entire rug is smoothed flat again. It was 2 days after Emmeline left town. Fritz was in the kitchen working through an ambitious celery root gratin. Wolfe was midway through an article on early Venetian banking fraud, and I was upstairs checking the front room windows for a draft I swore had crept in since Monday. That's when the doorbell rang. Not unusual, except that it was precisely 11:13 a.m., well outside the usual delivery schedule, too early for clients and a bit too late for milkmen, assuming any still operated in Manhattan. Fritz, who never rushes, appeared seconds later. "A note," he said. "No courier, no return address. It was left in the mailbox, hand-delivered." He passed me a small envelope, beige, with a crisp edge and the faint scent of lavender. "Another anonymous message?" I asked. "Possibly," Fritz said. "Or a thank you." Wolfe, who had overheard us from the office, called out, "Bring it here." I brought it in and handed it over. He opened it with the same delicacy he used on French pastry. Inside was a single slip of paper, one line, typed. E. Voss was not the first. Wolfe read it twice, then he read it again. I waited. Nothing. "So," I said, "either we're being taunted again, or someone's trying to dig a second rabbit hole." Wolfe held the note up to the light. "Same typeface," he murmured. "Same ribbon grade. Possibly the same machine as the earlier kitchen threat." "Same author?" "No," Wolfe said. "Different phrasing. Different tone. Less imperative, more suggestive." I leaned against the edge of the desk. "You think someone's trying to tell us Emmeline wasn't the first typist Gregory used to record sensitive revisions?" "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "Or that she wasn't the first to disappear." That quieted the room. Wolfe stared at the paper for a long moment, then placed it face down on the desk. "I do not like implication," he said finally. "It is the currency of cowards." "Want me to follow up?" I asked. He hesitated. "No, not yet." The next day Saul dropped by without calling first. For most people, that's a sin worthy of banishment. But Saul Panzer is the exception to Wolfe's laws. If you're good enough to get into Wolfe's good graces uninvited, you're good enough to skip the formalities. He brought news. "You were right about Driscoll," he told Wolfe. "He's gone, but not far." That got Wolfe's attention. "Explain." "He rented a cabin near Tarrytown under a different name. Local postman recognized the photo I showed. He's been living there since the morning Caroline was arrested." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "And why are you telling me this now?" "Because yesterday," Saul said, "he had a visitor. He handed me a photograph. Grainy but clear enough, Mortimer Cray." I blinked. "Cray? The man who came to us in a panic? The man who was supposedly blindsided by the testament?" "The very same," Saul said. Wolfe didn't speak. He reached slowly for the note from the day before. Voss was not the first. I began to feel the room shift again. That invisible tilt Wolfe gets when something clicks, and the machine that's been humming quietly behind his eyes starts throwing sparks. "You think Cray's been lying to us this whole time?" I asked. Wolfe looked at Saul. "Did you follow him after?" Saul nodded. He left after 25 minutes. No briefcase, no visible exchange. Did he see you? No. Wolfe rose. That alone was enough to make the air go still. Then we must prepare, he said. Call him. Tell him we have an addendum to review. Request a visit. Be polite. I called Cray an hour later. He agreed to come by that afternoon, just after lunch. He arrived wearing the same worried expression he always wore, but this time it didn't feel honest. It felt rehearsed, practiced, like someone trying to keep a tremor out of their voice or a lie from staining their collar. Wolfe didn't offer him a seat. He remained standing, which for Wolfe is akin to shouting. "Mr. Cray," Wolfe said, "you misrepresented your role in this affair." Cray blinked. I'm not sure I follow." "Don't insult me," Wolfe said. "You visited Walter Driscoll 2 days ago, after claiming you hadn't spoken to him since Gregory Leeds's death." Cray went very still. I was tying up loose ends." Wolfe nodded. "Indeed. Loose ends, such as the First Testament?" Cray's eyes flinched. It was small, but there. "You were aware," Wolfe continued, "not just of Gregory's intent, but of Caroline Leeds's effort to suppress it. You allowed her to act, you allowed Driscoll to move freely, because you believed it would lead to your ascension." Cray finally found his voice. "You think I colluded? That's absurd. You played both sides," Wolfe said, his tone now like cooled iron. "You presented yourself as the concerned administrator, but you had access to every draft Emmeline typed. You knew her role, and when she didn't return with the document, you panicked, not because she vanished, but because your alibi cracked." Cray swallowed. Wolfe leaned in. "You didn't orchestrate the betrayal, but you capitalized on it, and when it failed, when Miss Voss survived and returned, you shifted again, hoping to avoid scrutiny." "No," Wolfe said. "You will say nothing, because now you are irrelevant." That, I'll admit, was cold, but Cray didn't argue. He just nodded, pale and quiet, and let himself out. After he was gone, Wolfe returned to his chair and sank into it like a man whose weight had finally caught up with him. "So that's it?" I asked. "Cray's outed, Driscoll's in hiding, Caroline's indicted. What's left?" Wolfe reached for the original envelope, the one with Emmeline's name in the diary, the one typed on the same machine as the latest note. He turned it over. "No return address," he said, "but a faint trace of oil in the corner, machine oil, and a fibre, vellum, from an older envelope stock. No longer manufactured." He looked at me. The note was not from Driscoll, nor from Cray. "Then who?" Wolfe allowed himself a smile. One part satisfaction, one part curiosity still burning. "I don't know," he said. "And that, Mr. Goodwin, is unacceptable." The case, it seemed, wasn't quite closed. After all, Wolfe has a habit that only a few people ever get to witness. When something bothers him, really bothers him, he starts rereading the dictionary. Not for meaning, but for language. Words, in Wolfe's world, are weapons, and when logic fails to close a case, he returns to the arsenal. That afternoon, after Cray had fled like a dog from a broom, Wolfe sat in his chair, flipping slowly through the V volume, pausing occasionally on definitions that seemed to echo the case's unfinished notes. I didn't press him. Wolfe works like a slow boiler, plenty of pressure under the surface, but if you interrupt before the steam rises, you get scorched. Instead, I reviewed the file for the 4th time, tracing every event like I was chasing footprints in snow. And the more I stared, the more I started to see it. Not a hole, not an inconsistency, but an absence. A whisper that had been echoing since Emmeline came forward. It came down to the final copy. The carbon she'd given us. It had been complete, too complete. Every paragraph perfectly aligned, every clause intact, and yet she'd told us she hadn't finished the last page until the night before she disappeared. So how had she been so sure? How had she produced a clean copy, carbon and all, under pressure, without notes, without her machine? I told Wolfe. He didn't answer immediately, just lowered the book slowly. "You're correct," he said. "That copy was not made in haste, nor in secrecy. It was transcribed before she fled." "But she told us—" "Yes, she said she hid it, that she hadn't delivered it, that she was afraid." "All true?" "Perhaps," Wolfe said, "but not the whole truth." I leaned against the desk. "You think she left someone out?" "I think," Wolfe replied, "someone helped her. That changed the frame again. Not just Emmeline against the firm, not just Wolfe against deception, but someone else, an unknown third hand who had played a quiet, careful part." I stood. "You want Saul on it?" "No," Wolfe said. "We need someone with context. Call Sylvia Leeds." I paused. "Sylvia?" "Yes, she knew more than she admitted, and she never once asked to see the testament, not even after we revealed it." That was true. Most people would have demanded to see it, out of curiosity, entitlement, suspicion. Sylvia hadn't even blinked. I called her. She agreed to come. Over that evening. She arrived promptly at 7, wearing a grey sweater dress and no makeup. Her hair was tied back and she looked calm. Too calm. Wolfe didn't waste time. "Miss Leeds," he began, "when your father dictated his final testament, Emmeline Voss was the only official witness. But she wasn't the only person who knew the contents." Sylvia folded her hands. "I never said I was. You said she came to you, that she was frightened." "Yes." "You never mentioned whether she confided the details." "Because I didn't think it mattered." "It does," Wolfe said, "because the carbon she delivered to us last week, typed and pristine, was not made in secrecy. It was prepared ahead of time, at someone's urging, someone she trusted." Sylvia said nothing. "You gave her the typewriter," Wolfe said, "didn't you?" Still silence. Wolfe pressed on. "You told her she couldn't win alone, that she had to make a copy, keep a record, and you kept the original carbon safe, just in case." "I didn't think it would come to that," she said finally. "I hoped Caroline would back down, that the threats would stop. But then Emmeline disappeared and I panicked." "You sent the anonymous note," I said. "E. Voss was not the first." She nodded. "Because she wasn't. Gregory had another assistant years ago, before Emmeline, a man named Miles Bourne. He left the firm suddenly, no warning, no notice. My father told me it was for discretion's sake, but I always suspected otherwise." Wolfe was quiet for a long moment. "And the diary?" he asked. "I sent that too," Sylvia admitted. "The name typed on the page, just to rattle you, to make you ask questions. I wanted to help, but I was afraid Caroline could be dangerous. You saw that." "She could," Wolfe agreed. "But silence makes her stronger. You chose wisely." Sylvia stood. "I didn't come to be absolved." "No," Wolfe said. "But you came to be known. That matters more." After she left, Wolfe returned to his chair and poured the last of his beer. I sat across from him. So, it was Sylvia, the second hand behind the curtain. Yes, Wolfe said. The moral ballast, the one who stayed quiet long enough for others to fall. You going to tell Kramer? No, there is no crime in conscience. He said it so flatly, so simply, that it hit harder than any grand pronouncement. Outside, the wind had picked up. A late spring gust rattled the window panes, and Fritz closed the shutters before returning to his endless polishing of the silver service. Wolfe finished his drink and looked toward the fire. I sometimes envy those who believe silence is safe, he said. But they are wrong. Silence in the end is only useful if it is deliberate. And hers was? Yes, Wolfe said. Deliberate and dignified. I filled the last sheet of paper, closed the folder and set it gently on the shelf marked completed. Not closed, not solved, just completed. Because some stories aren't about what's done. They're about what was endured. I looked at Wolfe. You know, I said, this all started with a typist. He gave me a sideways glance. All stories begin with a witness. Then he turned back to his book, and the brownstone once again returned to silence.